What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Surfing the Stream. My name is Matt, and I am continuing my review series for The Evil Dead. Leading up to Evil Dead Burn, I am reviewing every single Evil Dead movie, and today I am reviewing Evil Dead Rise. After a mysterious earthquake uncovers the Necronomicon beneath a rundown apartment building, a young boy unknowingly unleashes an ancient evil. When his mother becomes possessed by a Deadite, the family finds themselves trapped inside the building, fighting for their lives. I have to start with the opening scene of this movie before I talk about anything else with this movie, because it is without a doubt the best opening sequence of any of these movies. And honestly, I would throw it up there at the top opening sequences of any horror movie ever made. The fake out with what it looks like, the classic Evil Dead demon POV racing through the woods, only for it to end up being like this drone, immediately got a smile from me. It's a clever little way of acknowledging the original movies while telling you that this isn't going to be the same experience. And then the movie just keeps escalating from there. Teresa's getting her scalp ripped off. Jessica is smashing her face with that drone. And then Caleb dives into the lake to save her, only to get beheaded underwater. And then Jessica slowly rises out of the lake as the title card appears behind her. That entire sequence is so damn awesome. It is one of the more memorable things about Evil Dead Rise. I think if you go ask any fan of this series, this sequence is going to be one of the things that they mention as one of their favorite moments of the entire series. It's one of those openings that just immediately grabs your attention, and from the second the title appeared, I was completely locked in. Now, I do have one pretty big pet peeve when it comes to movies, and Evil Dead Rise isn't immune to that pet peeve. I understand it in the grand scheme of things. This is kind of a nitpick, okay? But these are the things that just drive me up the fucking wall. I need to believe that characters make reasonably believable decisions. I'm willing to accept demons, possession, ancient cursed books, all that shit. You know, you got me on board. All right. I'm there for all of that. But I still need the people and the characters in this movie to act like people. Take Danny, for example. An earthquake opens this giant hole in the parking garage, and his first thought is, you know what? I'm going to climb down there and see what's down there. Absolutely not. Okay. No kid is looking at a massive hole like that after an earthquake, I might say, and think that going into this massive hole is a good idea. No kid. Then you've got moments where the emotional arcs just don't quite land for me. Ellie dies and everyone says they're devastated, but it never really feels like they're actually devastated from the reactions that we are getting from these actors during these scenes. Or Cassie just casually eating that pizza immediately after an earthquake. Look, I have kids. I know when something terrifying happens, it's going to be difficult to get them to do anything else other than be terrified in that particular moment, especially after an earthquake. So I just don't believe that kind of shit. Those little moments, like, they don't ruin the movie for me, but they do pull me out of it enough because the characters don't always react the way that real people do. I know that's probably a weird complaint in a movie about Deadites, but honestly, it's something that bothers me in any movie, is not just this one in particular. So once the horror really kicks in, though, I stop caring because Lee Cronin absolutely knows how to create memorable horror sequences. So that is one of my biggest complaints of the entire movie. I want to get that out the way. I do think that some of the other things are not quite as good, but I want to jump into some of the things that I really love about Evil Dead Rise. And like I said, once the horror kicks in, this movie is relentless. One thing I really appreciated were all the subtle callbacks to the earlier movies. I'm not a huge fan of when they do things for callbacks that are so on the nose and you're like pointing at the screen, you're like, that is super fucking obvious. I like little Easter eggs. Like, you got to look for it and you got to be a fan to know what these callbacks are. Like Ellie getting tangled in those elevator cables, which reminded me of Cheryl being tangled in the vines from the original, or that blood-filled elevator that explodes open, which feels like a big nod to The Shining, and it just fits perfectly into this Evil Dead movie. Those are the kind of Easter eggs that I love. They're there if you recognize them, but they never stop the movie just to remind you that you're watching yet another Evil Dead film. That is one of the big critiques that I have with Alien Romulus and Fede Alvarez, which I mentioned on my last review. Those callbacks are super on the nose. It's right there in your face, and it's kind of eye rolling at times. And speaking of directors, Lee Cronin does a great job with the source material here. But I will say this, I don't think everything that he tries works, especially during some of those early dialogue heavy scenes. But when it comes to creating horror imagery, this guy just absolutely delivers. There are so many shots throughout this movie that stuck with me long after the credits rolled. The camera sitting just below the water while Beth gives Cassie a bath, the gas burner igniting and lighting up Beth's face. Little visual moments like that just give this movie so much personality. And again, not every shot needs to be flashy, but when Lee Cronin goes for something creative, he usually nails it in regards to this movie. And one of the things that got nailed with this movie was Ellie. When I think about iconic Deadites throughout this franchise, I honestly think that Ellie belongs at the top. The makeup work is phenomenal. The costume design is creepy as shit. Every time she's on screen, she feels genuinely threatening. She instantly became one of my favorite Deadites of the entire series. And I really appreciate that with this movie in particular, it's like they're giving the Deadites more personality. So I like that direction that they're heading with this particular series, where they make Ellie the overarching Deadite. Now, obviously, there's a final boss at the very end, but for a majority of the movie, it is Ellie as the de facto main Deadite. I do believe she is one of the standout performances of the entire series that I have watched so far. And another thing that I appreciated was how this movie handled its humor. After watching the entire franchise back to back, I realized that the comedy in the series just isn't for me. And if you've been following along, then you know that I have issues with Evil Dead 2 and The Army of Darkness, whereas The Evil Dead 2013, those movies lean more to the horror side of things, and I really love it when it does that. Evil Dead Rise finds a really nice middle ground here. I'm completely okay with the violence and the gore being so ridiculous that it is hilarious. Give me more of that. It is the just the camp that I'm just not a huge fan of. Like if you go back to Evil Dead 2, just all of the slapstick comedy, not a fan of that. But when Ellie sucks Gabriel's eye out and launches it directly into somebody else's mouth, laughed hysterically because it was so ridiculously over the top that it just felt perfectly at home in this universe. And the same goes for Beth looking through the little peephole of a door and then Ellie getting blown away by the shotgun. Those moments are genuinely funny, and I loved what they did with the humor throughout this entire movie. And when you can make that comedy make people physically uncomfortable while watching your movie, I think that is the key to really excelling with the humor in this series. I think Evil Dead Rise might be, at this point, it's not necessarily the grossest or the meanest or anything like that, but I think this movie does a really great job of just being gross. And if you watch The Mummy, which has been confirmed as an Evil Dead spin-off movie or set in the same universe, then Lee Cronin directed that movie. You understand where the grossness comes from. But the original trilogy was disgusting in a fun and campy way. The cheese grater, that was fucking awesome. The sound design alone made me cringe. And then you've got Bridget throwing up the black swarm of bugs, eating broken glass, and later Cassie stabbing her with Stephanie. Those were multiple moments where I genuinely found myself squirming. I think a huge part of that comes down to the sound design, which is truly incredible with this movie. Every crunch, every slice, every disgusting little detail is amplified just enough to make you feel like you're right there in the middle of the action. So overall, I came away liking Evil Dead Rise quite a bit more than the first time that I watched it. I remember watching it for the first time a couple years ago and thinking to myself, you know what? That was okay, but it wasn't anywhere near 2013's Evil Dead, which it doesn't. I still think at this point in the series, Evil Dead remake 2013 is right there at the top for me. And while this is definitely an entertaining movie, it doesn't come close to the 2013 Evil Dead for me. I still think the first 30 minutes are the weakest part of this movie. Some of the dialogue feels a little awkward, and I don't think the character development is as strong. But once the horror takes over, this movie absolutely takes off. The characters are solid overall. I mean, they're nothing to write home about, but they're good enough to keep you invested in the story. And that's really all I need with an Evil Dead film. They're definitely better than anything that we got with the original trilogy. The acting, just for lack of a better phrase, gets the job done. And the horror is fantastic. The practical effects are incredible, as always. And there are several moments that I think will go down as some of the more memorable moments in Evil Dead history. But I think Evil Dead Rise does strike the balance perfectly here with the horror and the comedy. And yeah, I really enjoyed this movie more so this time around than I did the first time around. But guys, let me know down in the comments below what you thought about Evil Dead Rise. Where does it rank on your Evil Dead ranking list? And I cannot wait to talk to y'all about Evil Dead Burnout. But yeah, if you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like, subscribe button. That's really going to help me grow this channel. And make sure you hit the notification bell so that you know when the review for Evil Dead Burn drops. But thank y'all for joining me. I will catch y'all next time on another review. Laters.